Yeah, please, Kamia.
Okay. Welcome everyone to the third Young-led Climate Partnership webinar. This webinar is a part of the webinar series organized by TYK Research and Action Consulting and Energy Academy Indonesia. My name is Kamia Handayani. I'm a Ph.D. researcher at the University of Twente, and I will be facilitating our discussions today. This webinar brings the topic of energy transitions. In particular, we would like to learn from the Dutch and Indonesian experience with regard to the transformations from fossil fuels to renewables. Energy transitions is not a new term. We have learned in our history several transformations in the global energy sector. For example, in the 18th century, there was a transformation from the pre-industrial era to the industrial era driven by the inventions of coal-based power steam. So these transformations took well over a century and started from 1920s. The new transformations in the global energy sector begin. It was electricity and petroleum-based technology which replaced the status quo of the steam-based coal-based steam power. And today, with the increasing attentions and concerns on global warming, the energy transitions now refers to the global transformations from fossil fuel-based to zero carbon-based energy sector. These transformations require multiple approaches, and among other approaches are the innovations in technology and also social innovations. For example, the innovations in energy storage is critically important to balance the intermittent characteristic of renewable energy. And also, social innovations is essential to increase the role of society in these transformations. With that, today's webinar will bring attention to energy innovations and social innovations in the light of energy transitions. I'm pleased to introduce our three excellent speakers. The first one is Beau Warbroek. Beau is a PhD candidate at the University of Twente. His research focused on the governance of energy transitions, in particular bottom-up initiatives on the energy transitions, which will be presenting by him today. Beau also currently working in a consulting company in the Netherlands as a grant specialist. And the next speaker, we have a special guest from Indonesia, Dr. Ichsan. Dr. Ichsan is a professional in the energy industry. He has an extensive experience in the renewable energy projects in Indonesia and also in other countries. He has worked in this area for more than 15 years. And today he will be sharing with us about the implementations of bioenergy project in Indonesia. Our last speaker, but certainly not least, is Martijn Blom. Martijn is a PhD candidate at the University of Twente. His specialty is on the long-term storage for electricity, and therefore today he will be sharing with us about the implementations or about the current or the latest status of the energy storage. And now I would like to ask you to give your full attention to all the speakers' presentations, and please do help us developing our discussions by posting your comments, questions, and feedback through our YouTube chat box. It is located on the right side of your screen. And without further ado, I invite Beau to start his presentations. Beau, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Kamia. Here we go. So, as Kamia rightfully underscored, the energy transition is not only about technological innovations, but very much about social innovations as well. And in my presentation, I'd like to highlight what bottom-up action, so action by citizens, can mean for the energy transition as a more socially innovative process. So first of all, I'd like to set the scene against what backdrop these citizen initiatives sort of emerge and are booming, especially throughout Western Europe and the Netherlands in particular. How they can be considered social innovations as well, these local citizen initiatives. What's holding them back, because they're booming, but still their development shouldn't be taken for granted. And how we should go forward from here. And here I look really at the role of governments as well in that sense. So first of all, I'd like to bring you back a bit, some 30 years ago. We firstly started discussing about how we should take into account the future needs of next generations on a supranational scale. So this is more than 3 decades ago that we started thinking about how we should go about using natural resources. Fast forward, again, a couple of decades later, in the Paris Agreement, we're still trying to figure out the basics of how we go about staying within this 1.5 degrees global warming. So we're still discussing the very parameters and frameworks of this energy transition. And while we're discussing this, some nations are even pulling out of the Paris Agreement. But on the other hand, luckily, we see on the local level that a lot of action groups are sort of stepping up. And they decide to organize themselves and taking matters into their own hands, such as local governments, cities. And in my case, my research interest really goes into these local citizen action groups. So in the Netherlands, the situation is not that far from what we see on a supranational scale, that we have huge ambitions, but in terms of realizing our ambitions, we seem to be slacking, so to speak. Even the European Environmental Agency mentioned that the Netherlands will not achieve its targets for 2020 if we don't step our game up. So again, from the top down, we see a sort of a gridlock and a stall in the situation. But luckily, again, we see that from the bottom up, a lot of these local citizen groups are emerging throughout the Netherlands. And in the last couple of years, we really see a tremendous growth of these citizen groups. So what I'm trying to say here is that in terms of the energy transition, we cannot really rely on a single intervention from a supranational scale, but we have to look at different scales and from different perspectives as well. I argue that a large part of this energy transition also involves that society sort of steers along the lines of policy and development we'd like to go. So really deciding which transition path we're going to follow. And with all these different citizen groups like booming in the Netherlands and Western Europe, we see that their value doesn't just lie in that they generate energy or they save energy, but we also see that the income that they generate in these initiatives, it stays in the local economy. Furthermore, if you have a neighbor who's putting up solar panels on his roof, you're interested in what his business case is and why he or she decided to invest in solar panels. So we see that having energy in your local environment also fosters social acceptance of these technologies. So having that said, what do these citizen initiatives actually do? Well, to be frank, it doesn't only revolve around generating low carbon energy, but we can also see that, for instance, this small village of Reduzem, which is in the north of the Netherlands, back in the 90s, out of dissent with socio-economic and demographic decline, the community decided to take matters into their own hands and install the wind turbine in order to revitalize their village. So they could grant some money to the local music association and make sure that whatever facilities there was in the village, they kept it on the same level. So we see that renewable energy can serve social purposes as well. Other initiatives in the Netherlands, for example, is a large solar PV farm. So they differ in scale, and this specific project more involved really citizens wanting to make even their island sustainable and independent of fossil fuels. So what I'm trying to say here is that the energy transition can be considered a process of social innovation as well, in which citizens really can have a crucial role. And we can definitely see that in the Netherlands, there's a tendency of people that they like to be transparent about where their energy comes from, and they'd like to be more like they have an influential role on how they buy the energy, and even if they generate the energy themselves. In Indonesia, it's a different case. We in the Netherlands are a bit, I would say, we're in a lucky situation that whenever we put an electric device in the socket, we have energy. In Indonesia, we shouldn't take it for granted, and these citizen initiatives can mean that local communities can have their own energy supply. So we see that there's the energy transition can be considered a socially innovative process in the sense that we get human needs that were previously not satisfied. Nextly, we see that the energy transition can also foster changes in social relations. Where we previously were just consumers of energy, now we don't only consume energy, but also produce it. And in that sense, we have a more competitive position vis-a-vis the fossil fuel-based regime. Lastly, and the third dimension of social innovation is that it's also about that we increase the social political capability and access to resources. And as I just underscored in this example of this local rural village, you can use the income that you generate by generating renewable energy to boost your local economy. So you get access to other resources you previously didn't have. So what's exactly the problem? They seem to be booming throughout Western Europe. They seem to be doing well. Well, actually, that's not really the case. And this is where really the governance context kicks in. And in the Netherlands specifically, although we have a good infrastructure, still connecting these large solar PV farms or these small wind turbines to the grid can be a very costly process. Furthermore, because the Netherlands is a relatively small country, the spatial planning regime is not really geared to stimulating these renewable energy developments. So especially for wind turbines, these processes for spatial planning can be really lengthy and costly as well. Nextly, and this is what I really experienced in my own work, is that among these local governments, you really have differences in how they decide to support these local initiatives. And in the one government, you can really have a policy entrepreneur, so someone who really bends the rules a bit, but which is still allowed, and really tries to go at lengths to support these local initiatives. Whereas in other local governments, you have a more traditional employees and civil servants, which say, yeah, well, good idea, but we have these and these regulations that it simply doesn't fit our policies. So there's a huge difference, and this brings about a really an unequal situation, so to speak. And lastly, and this really is about financing, and this is what my current job also is about, is that some subsidies, loans, or tax exemptions that these local initiatives can use, they hardly pay off and don't really give a good business case. So from a way forward from here, I would say is that we really use these what's happening from the bottom up, what's emerging from grassroots level, as sort of a point of departure in making our policies. Instead of making policies from the top down, we should be inspired by what's happening in society. That being said, we should also look at more flexible ways of organizing legislation and regulations. Instead of having a really rigid spatial planning regime, we should definitely look at more flexible ways of organizing this. So not only being socially innovative in changing relations, but also as governments being more innovative in what kind of instruments you use. So not only using subsidies, but also using your spatial planning regime to stimulate this movement. So what I'd like to say in sum, because I only have 10 minutes, is that these what we see here on at least in Western Europe and especially in the Netherlands is that citizens they organize themselves and they take matters into their own hands, which is a really desirable movement, if you ask me. They come in different sizes and shapes and they pursue different goals, whether it's just about making their village or island more sustainable or using energy, renewable energy, as a means to achieve your social goals. In that regard, they can be considered social innovations, which I think is really has a huge potential in terms of how we look at the energy transition. Well, they still, we see them booming, but they struggle to develop further. And this really has to do with the current governance context in which especially subnational governments have a huge role to play. In that sense, that they can implement game changers, to offer them a fair chance. So my last statement will be, dream big, but start small. All these small initiatives, they started small, but in the end, collectively, they're becoming quite a big movement. So that's your take-home message.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Beau.
Yep.
An enlightening presentations with regard to social innovations, in the sense that society, movement from the bottom up, start from small and then it become bigger. I have a questions with relate to presentations, but I will hold these questions for later, because next we will have a presentation from Ichsan.
Yes. Hello, Mas Ichsan.
I will remind the audience to ask questions and comments on our YouTube chat box, and we will discuss those at the end of the last presentation. Please, Ichsan, the time is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you also for Academy inviting me. Sorry, I have also a little bit issue on my connection, so therefore I cannot join you at Hangout. My name is Ichsan, and then today I would like to present about the waste to bioenergy project in Indonesia. I did for academic work for the certifications, but today is more specifically that I would like to express how serious about the waste in Indonesia now. Next.
Yep.
So I did some projects also for renewable energy. One of my projects for solar PV is the Asian Games 2018. We installed 1 megawatt peak in Gelora Bung Karno in Jakarta. So it's quite a huge project. I did geothermal, I also did bioethanol, and some others also for hydro and also for biomass projects. This is a little bit background of me. And next. So you can see here that fossil fuel to renewable energy, we don't expect like this picture. This picture was taken in Bangladesh by myself. I was there like 3 weeks ago because we have a project in Bangladesh. So in Bangladesh, it's quite interesting, the transitions of renewable energy. So all the cars there are working with the CNG. So, and also expected for the gas from the biogas to CNG soon. So, but we don't expect like this. The light rickshaw, and this is what we call renewable energy. So next slide, page 4.
Yeah.
This is about fuel composition in Indonesia. And then you can see that during the general elections 2019 and 2024, there's a presidential term to mitigate rising energy import costs. So you can see that if we keep this is actually like now, and then at the end we will have a decline of the this is from Wood Mackenzie. Next one. Regarding the sustainable development goals in Indonesia, also that we can express some national target here. That the acidification ratio it's about 98%. 2009. But there are some issues also on this target. Can you still follow me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then this electrification ratio is not a 100 ratio in Indonesia, because based on the PLN definitions, that if you have one connection of bulb in one village already, and then it's called already 100% of electrification entering the village. So this is something that we can improve in the future. Next is about the still on the same slide, supporting national program. There are about 35,000 megawatts that should be installed in 2019, but some of them still some project delay on this, and then national limit about 23% should be in 2025. Still a long way to go. Now it's only about 11% in Indonesia. About the poverty reduction, it's also still on the target of 8%. Still a lot of homework from Indonesia side. Emission reduction and so on. So in this presentation, I would like to more express about reducing waste, because Indonesia has been the second world marine polluters, and we have about 3.2 million tons per year. So next slide, slide 6. This is about the waste condition in Indonesia. Indonesia has 3.2 million tons, and it becomes the second biggest marine polluters. One ranked below China, and also increasingly by up 50%. So a lot of things. Next slide. Generally, if you see the regulations on renewable energy in Indonesia, there are a lot of regulations already, and some of them also a bit contradictory, and also a little bit slow on the progress of renewable energy, especially for the latest regulation from the Ministry of Energy, number 50, 2017. Based on that, a lot of projects now is on hold because it should be registered by PLN, which is the state-owned electricity company in Indonesia. Yeah, and also should be have following a long procedure than before. Next slide. You can see also here on the page 8 here, there are a lot of regulations based on waste. So it's already on track. But if you see on the regulation per press number 35 2018 related to instruction from the president to push for accelerations of waste processing installations for electricity, it's also still not in place for implementation. One of the reasons is because there is no regulation from Ministry of Finance yet, and also there is no regulations on the local government regulations. So without this, there are no tipping fee can be issued, and also some projects will be on hold. So what is the challenge and opportunities in Indonesia? Generally, from Indonesia's side, there are some regulations that it's over-regulated, and that makes also a lot of challenge on the implementations. Today, we just have a long discussion with GTF funding, a Green Climate Fund in Indonesia. They are also part of the Ministry of Finance task force. And then we also express our concern on the regulations. Since I'm also a part of the Indonesian Renewable Energy Society, we fight a lot to push the government and also for the funding to support us to implement the renewable energy in Indonesia. And then we also have a challenge on the investor side, because the rapid change of regulations make also a challenge for them to invest. And then also the build, operate own transport system makes it difficult for investment scheme. Because if you put, for example, that like a project in Bali that's now under bidding, it takes also difficult and also challenge on implementations, because the project developer has to own the land in Bali, which is very expensive price. And also some the price of the operational cost from the clearing side is also not very interesting in some areas, especially for waste. But also mentioned here that the TPP needs to propose from provincial power, and then PLN doesn't want to buy as the regulation from stated on 35/2018 from the President's instruction. This is because of PLN cannot accept more than 8 cents per kilowatt hour of the price, while in the regulation from President is about 13.65 if I'm not wrong, per kilowatt hour. So there are some gaps there. Who will fund this gap? We expect that the Ministry of Finance can issue the regulations to support the subsidy for the remaining of the cost. Next. If you see also that despite all of the challenge that we have, we also have opportunity in Indonesia. Indonesia is like a Middle East for the biomass. You can see that a lot of biomass can easily grow in Indonesia. And also a lot of waste, for example, like from a palm oil meal waste, we have more than 700 palm oil meal in Indonesia now. And then it can turn out to be not only for biodiesel, but also for fatty acid ester, and then you can extract it for chemical components on. So a lot of opportunities on that. Only for electricity, you can see here that with the potential source of the biomass that we can produce like 24 gigawatt electricity. So based on the target that we need 30 gigawatt, and then this 24 gigawatt is already put 2/3 of the target. Next slide. On the page 11, that you can see that the energy is like that you can physical compression and biocompression. So a lot of projects already implemented and for the waste especially, and then like in Solo, they also do starting up the project development for the waste implementation. Next slide. On page 12, you can see that the bioenergy product can be varied for some products based on the type of generations of the biofuel. You can see also here like first generation, second generation, third generation, and a fourth generation. Coming now is the fourth generation. The first generation is you compete with the food, while the second generation that you utilize the non-food grade for the biofuel, and the fourth like algae. The fourth generation, it means that you can do the sequestration again. Finish each for the biodiesel that you hear about the news lately, but also there's a challenge from Indonesia that there's too much biodiesel and also some tax to European market. So I'm also personally don't see that by the first station side, because we looking at a new waste to plan we can use from some metal we can use to replace the diesel replacement, for example. And the other one we can do is biogas, biochar, wood pellet, bioethanol, bio-oil, biodiesel, biofuel, biochemical, and biofertilizer. So a lot of things that we can produce from the waste, basically, and then you can use it for the content, for the replacing of the chemicals or fossil fuels. Slide 13, next. This is an example of one of my projects. That the first biogas from palm oil mill effluent, which is the waste from palm oil mill that produced for electricity, with location in Riau province, and then this 2 GW electricity and 5 Ministry of Energy. So the first one.
Hello, Mas Ichsan. Hello. I will try to connect again with him. Hello.
Sorry, I'm stepping out.
We are at page 13.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we are at page 13 right
Page
now.
13?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the first project that financed by Ministry of Energy, and I'm involved from the planning till execution of the project, and then we did the commissioning, and this picture was taken during the commissioning. So basically, that you can produce also from the waste from the palm oil mill, that you can produce it for electricity generation. Page 14. So in page 14, this is we are doing now also the project converting the manure for CNG, and the location is in the West Java. So there are a big farm, cattle, and then they have about 24,000 cattle there, and then you can convert the manure for CNG. This project is on progress now. So we did the feasibility study, and then we would like to do the start for the construction. The next one is page 15. You can also convert the waste from like municipal solid waste, and also from waste from industries and so on, for diesel replacement. So this is not a biodiesel, but its characteristic is a diesel like Euro 5 in Europe. So we are on progress now. We find a good partner from Germany, and then we are doing the project development for the waste to diesel at this moment. And page 16, we are also doing waste to biochar. This machine is invented by Indonesian, and then this Dr. Handayani, and then is the inventor that patented this invention in Malaysia. So in Indonesia have a carbonizer machine that working already 24 hours in Bantar Gebang. That the product of this carbon machine is for biopesticide, liquid carbon fertilizer or EC2O, and biocarbon. The biocarbon can be used for biofertilizer and construction material. So I'm advising a state-owned company now to push for this project, and we are on the progress for this. And today I just have a discussion also to use these machines in Suriname. So it's a big opportunity also there. Next is the last slide. I do hope that Indonesia can be the world sources of biomass, like fossil fuel for the Middle East. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Ichsan, for your interesting presentation. Yes, I already see from your presentation there is similarities with there is an issue that is similar with what have been pointed out by Beau, but we will discuss it later. For now, we will proceed with presentations from Martijn. Please, Martijn, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Kamia. Let me just turn on the screen sharing. And here we go. So what I'll present about today is energy storage. And first of all, I will explain why we need energy storage in some very basic steps. And then I'll introduce some of the storage technologies that are already available at the moment. And we'll do some very basic calculations to them to get an idea about how they work and what they can store. So first, a brief history of the energy consumption on Earth. So at some point on Earth, we got people and they discovered fire. And that was actually the first time we used stored energy in the form of biomass to enhance our way of living, for cooking the food or for heating. Now over time, we got more people and people discovered new things. They discovered coal, they discovered electricity, they invented new ways of transportation, and that continued for a long time. And you can see that in the energy use on Earth. So from the 1800s, the global energy consumption has risen dramatically, and especially in the last 5 decades, it has increased a lot. Now, luckily, this is not all bad news, as we are learning that it's not good to only use fossil fuels, and we're actually starting to mix renewables into our energy mix. So, for instance, in the Netherlands, in 2017, about 14% of our electricity was renewable. And of that renewable electricity, 60% came from wind energy, because of course it's windy a lot in the Netherlands. Well, in Indonesia, you would expect more from solar power. And also our government, they invest or plan to invest heavily in expanding the capacities of wind energy. Now, when we take a look at the simple wind turbine, we basically buy the thing and then we blow at it and it starts generating electricity. However, the wind that generates electricity is not constant. There are days when you have more wind, days with less wind, and days without wind. And so also the output power from these wind turbines is not constant. Now what we can do is we can sum the total output power of all wind turbines in the Netherlands, and we can express that in a power during a certain day of the year. In this case, it was the year 2017. And what we can see is that at some points we have very high peaks, where it's apparently very windy, but there are also periods at which there is almost no wind power production because, well, there is no wind. And of course, if we make a energy mix that contains a lot of this wind energy, this will be a problem, because during these low wind periods, we will have problems in supplying the energy that we need. And so we can sort of simplify this graph on the right and show it as an average power from wind per week. And then we can again summarize it in the weeks of the year. And what we can see, we have these very high highs, in which we might have some excess energy, and we have these very low lows, in which we have too little energy, because these lowest points, they determine the amount of wind turbines we have to place and have to build in order to get the minimum amount of energy we need always. Now, of course, what we can do is we can take these highest highs and place them in place of these lowest lows. But of course, that means a shift in time. So we need to store the energy over time. And then we can do a quick estimation. So say we can store 15% of the energy that we produced, and we can do it at 50% efficiency. And so if we take 1 kilowatt hour, put it in storage, we take out half a kilowatt hour. So we can then take the highest highs and put them in the lowest lows. And if you would then look at the power availability over the year, it would become much more constant. And these very low minima, they have disappeared. So with storing power, we can actually reduce the amount of wind turbines we need to supply the energy we always need. Now this storage comes in many forms, and we can sort of rate them on their discharge time and capacity. So on the low end, you have, for example, normal batteries. You know them from home, and they discharge very fast. Your phone is empty within a day, and their capacity is not that high. But you can use them in many cycles per year. And then on the high end, you would have, for instance, pumped hydro storage, in which it takes a long time to discharge all the energy, but the capacity is also very high. And then, of course, you would have very few cycles of charging, discharging within 1 year. Now, if you look at a few of these technologies, actually the only one who is commercially implemented on a large scale is pumped hydro storage. And about 90% of the total storage capacity in Europe is from this pumped hydro. And it works actually quite simply. You have water, which is in a low basin, and if you have excess energy, you pump that to a high basin. And then during times with too little electricity, you take the water from the high basin, let it flow past the generator into the low basin, and thereby getting your energy back. At the moment, this is cost effective, but of course, a suitable terrain is needed with mountains and stuff, and we don't have that in Holland. We can also look a bit in terms of how much energy can you actually store with this technology. So, for instance, if you take the Grand Maison Dam in France, there's a 930 meter high difference between the upper and the lower basin. That's quite a high dam. I have a picture of it. This is only the top basin, but all the way at the bottom, in the bottom right corner, that would be the low basin. Now, if you consider 1 cubic meter of water, which you pump from the low basin into the high basin, with some high school mathematics, you can calculate that costs you about 10 million joules of energy, which is the energy you store in the sort of best case scenario. In terms of energy density, it would be 2.5 kilowatt hours per cubic meter of water. Now, given that a kilowatt hour costs about 20 cents, you would store 50 euro cents worth of energy in 1 cubic meter of water or 1 cubic meter of space. So the energy density is not that high. Comparing that to, for instance, the battery in my mobile phone, I took it out. It was 9.5 watt hours, and at the size of 70 by 50 by 50 millimeters. So if you calculate an energy density based on that, you get more than 500 kilowatt hours per cubic meter. So it's 200 times more densely stored, this energy. So what we can see from that is, by utilizing a chemical conversion, as is what happens in a battery, it is possible to store a lot more energy per kilogram of per liter of space. And the way these things work is you take a compound A, molecular compound A, add some energy to that, and you can make that into compound B and vice versa. And examples of this are, of course, the battery, in which your energy is electricity, or also fuels. In that case, your fuel would be compound B, and you move back to compound A, which is carbon dioxide, and you get energy in the form of heat. Now, looking a bit further in these batteries, and what a normal battery does, I've taken a picture here from a large one from a forklift, is they put all their parts and pack them nice and closely in a compact manner. And that's why you get this high energy density. Their capacity and power, they both scale with the amount of surface area of these electrodes you see over here. So the more surface area, if you double the surface area, you double the capacity and you double the power. So actually the power and capacity are coupled in this way. Now, of course, because everything is so close together, you can charge and discharge them very quickly. But the disadvantage is because everything is so close together, you also have some self-discharge. So when you don't use it, so you leave your phone next to your bed for a week, then it will have consumed battery without being turned on. And that is self-discharge, because these chemicals can always react a bit also when you don't want it, and thereby losing energy. Another technology that is used to circumvent this are so-called redox flow batteries. And here you have a reaction zone, which determines the power of the system. And you have a storage tank for a liquid medium, which determines the capacity. And thereby you can scale both power and capacity independently. So you can make it work for a large variety of systems, for instance, long-term storage. And because you move the chemicals away from the reaction zone, you also limit the amount of self-discharge you get. A problem of that is it gets a bit more complicated, right? You need these pumps, you need all this equipment, you are handling liquids, you're moving parts. So it's more complicated and more for the long-term storage. So these were just a few of the technologies we have and the need for storage. I've shown you here in this few minutes. And a take-home message for you might be that we need energy storage to match our energy supply, which is intermittent, to our energy demand, which is actually quite constant. And for that, we need this energy storage. And there are many possible storage technologies, and they all have their different uses and applications, mostly based on storage time and capacity. And in the future, we will probably need all of them, and then even a few more. So there's a nice challenge for you and also me, the young climate engineers or developers, to make this happen. So with that, I would like to thank you a lot for your attention. And if there's any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Martijn. It was a very interesting presentation. It's although it is technical, but you presented it in a way that it can be understood. So I can see there is already a questions from our YouTube chat box. I think it's more on clarifications. I don't know if Ichsan is still here with us.
Hello.
Yes, I think this question is for Ichsan. It's related to your
echo here.
presentation.
Can you hear? Yeah.
Yes.
Echo, man.
Can you hear us, Mas Ichsan?
Yeah, sorry, I cannot hear clearly the question. The echo for me.
Okay. Can you repeat again, Kamia?
Okay, so there is a question. I think it's more clarifications on your presentations. What is the 98% electrification ratio? I think in Europe and Indonesia we have different definitions of electrifications. So I think the questions is, what do you mean by 80% electrification ratio? What electrification ratio it is?
Can you hear it, Mas Ichsan?
Sorry, still cannot hear you.
It's about the 98% electrification. What do you mean by 98% of electrification? That's the question. Hello?
Eko. Call lagi aja, Mas.
Okay,
Eko.
I will try to call you again.
So
You can move forward, Kamia, to the next question.
maybe I will help with clarification. Because in Indonesia, when we say electrifications, we mean that this is we try to improve electricity access, especially for those who will not have access to electricity. So when we say electrification ratio, it means that the ratio between people who already has access to electricity with all of the household with still do not have access to electricity. So in this case, in Indonesia now, there is still 2% of populations or households still do not have access to electricity. So it means like that. But if in Europe, electrification has different meaning. So if you have, for example, industry using other source of energy, for example, natural gas or any other form of energy, and then because of some reasons you want to use electricity as your source of energy, like before you using a car with diesel, and now you use electric car. So it's that is the term electrification that is quite often used in Europe, but in Indonesia we still use electrification term as the term to define or to measure how much people already have access to electricity. So that might be help to clarify the questions. There are also questions from the YouTube chat box, but first I want to comment on presentations from Beau and from Ichsan. You both pointed out about the capacity at the subnational level with regard to energy transition. So there is, for example, in Indonesia, there is already regulation in place at the national level, but then in the subnational level, there is still no clear regulations. And I heard from Beau, there is also the case in the Netherlands when you mentioned that the game changer would be the governance, especially in the local level. So maybe Beau can give your comment on that.
Yeah, definitely. And perhaps because I noticed in Ichsan's presentation that local governments even have a sort of that national government is more ambitious than local governments, or that they clash somehow. In Netherlands, you tend to see a different picture. In that local governments are even more ambitious than the national government, so they have more. So they want to be energy neutral in 2030, whereas in Netherlands we have our goals for 2050. So we see that these local governments, they are more close to these citizens and to small medium enterprises, and they can really help out in trying to tackle certain issues that they experience in when they want to invest for renewable energy or energy saving. So in that sense, national government is more important in setting up the sort of the general framework and subsidies, etc. But local governments can really sort of lower certain thresholds and see if they can support local parties in different ways. So in the Netherlands, you really see that these local governments can have a big role, and there's a tendency that they're more ambitious than the national government. So
clear.
Yeah.
Thank you for your explanations. So now I'm going to read questions from our YouTube chat box. So I will just read the questions. Given that the Netherlands in the EU lags behind in renewable energy productions, but at the same time, there are many local initiatives, what would you recommend for Netherlands to catch up with other EU countries? So this question is for Beau.
So that's a good question. For one, and that's sort of field of practice that I'm currently involved in grants and subsidies, is that you see that on a national scale, governments are really trying to push for the generation of energy, and whereas in the last couple of years we really focused on producing renewable energy. Now we tend to we incline towards the Paris Agreement, so we focus on CO2 reduction. And there you see that this can potentially have an influence on what kind of energy mix we will see in the coming years. And that's also what Martijn underscored, is that we will see that the wind energy portfolio will increase a lot. And in the Netherlands, this can be an issue because we're a small country, and with wind turbines onshore, we see that these spatial planning procedures typically consume about 6 years before you can actually install a wind turbine. Offshore wind turbines is a different story. They even can install them without this exploitation subsidy. So I would say for government, for the Netherlands, wind turbines and wind energy is the way to go. But definitely, considering that we're a small country, we should really also pay attention to all the roofs that we have and see if we can have more stimulating instruments for solar PV on existing roofs. So,
yeah. Clear. And we also have another questions. I don't know if Ichsan is still here.
Ichsan?
Yes, I'm here.
So the question is for you. She commented that it's a pity that your voice was not always clear. And then her question is, what kind of social innovations do you think would be most needed in Indonesia to accelerate the energy transition?
Yeah, I think as also what I do now is we try to find solutions not to push only renewable energy, but we come back to the core issue here, which is the climate change and also the utilization of the unused material. So what I'm trying to push also with some friends here is come back to the circular economic type of approach. So instead of a linear economic, and then it's better to push to circular economic, not only for the waste, but also anything else come out like textile, and also that has to be come back to the circle. So because if we push only for renewable energy, and then we will hit again to the regulations. But if we come back to the circular economic approach, then the renewable energy, water, and also others is only for the utilities that support the overall system. So I think that's more effective approach.
With regard to the social innovation question, I've seen that in Indonesia also there are initiatives emerging concerning the renewable energy projects, which comes from the bottom up or from the community. Maybe you can tell something about that. I heard that there is like 1 million program of rooftop, for example.
Yeah, I was in Surabaya last week, and then 2 days ago, and we also have a morning walk with the Ministry of Energy to promote the rooftop solar PV. The thing with the rooftop, there are also some challenge for the connections of parallel operations and capacity charge and so on. But we still believe that rooftop can be attractive also for PLN. So at this moment, which PLN is a state-owned company of Indonesia that focusing on the electricity, there is a subsidiary a company from PLN that also will do the retail of solar PV. There are also some project developers now in Indonesia that can finance the installations of solar PV. So you can even install like 5 kilowatt peak or more, like a 5 megawatt peak installations, and we can finance the capex, and that the owner can do the additional top up on the OPEX cost. That's already ongoing now in Indonesia. And also, there are also not only for solar PV, there are also some other development in Indonesia, electricity motorcycle, and also installations of the charging system, EV charging. And then I think that's interesting to focus not only for biodiesel that we are in the palm oil sector, but also we are distribute the risk on other technologies.
Thank you, Ichsan. There is another question. I hear that studies on ammonia as the new energy factor, replacing natural gas. Yes, this is question for Paul. I hear that studies on ammonia as the new energy factor, replacing natural gas, are quite popular. What do you think about the idea? Do you think this is applicable?
Hello?
Yes, the question is about the...
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear, Ichsan?
So the question is on ammonia as the new energy factor. Maybe someone can comment on that? Maybe Martijn?
Yeah, sure. I can comment on that. So if we look at the elements that are abundant on Earth, there are 3 elements which are suitable to run a cycle that can store and release our power. There's carbon, which we of course know from the regular fossil fuels, hydrogen, which is often mentioned as a renewable energy factor, and also nitrogen. And actually, it does not really matter which cycle you get running, because you can interconvert all these cycles. So you can change carbon-based energy to hydrogen-based energy to nitrogen-based energy. And in the end, it will just depend on which cycle is easiest to get going and easiest to transport, easiest to store. That will ultimately determine which one you will use most. And now, of course, the ammonia cycle we already used that in the sense of fertilizers. But for large-scale storage, there are, of course, some safety issues to consider. For instance, it's a poisonous gas. Emissions are harmful. So I don't know if it will be the solution, but I'm quite sure that it will be part of the solution.
Clear. Thank you for your comment, Martijn. We are running out of time, but I would like to use maybe another 2 minutes to ask final questions for all of you. It's more on a closing statement from you, because this platform is for not particularly for young, but of course it's platform for everyone. But as the young who work on the energy transitions, what would be your message for the young generations? How can they play a significant role on this transformation pathway from fossil fuel to renewable? Maybe start with Martijn.
Yeah, what I would say, I think that on a technology level, we can get our systems working and running in a manner that is sufficient to go sustainable. But it's a matter of people willing to make the change happen. So on the one hand, you have the governments, as Beau also said, but also people as persons. And we should get used to the idea that something is changing. And we now have the chance to make a choice to either be part of the problem or to help find a solution. So if someone asks you, can I place a wind turbine in your backyard? Don't say, no, it ruins my view. Say, yes, it will help me get a nice future for myself and my kids.
Oh, what a powerful message. Thank you, Martijn. And Beau?
Yeah, I can definitely underscore what Martijn just mentioned, and it was also in the last slide of my presentation, and this is really what we see in all these small citizen initiatives. If you start small, it may seem futile or that you don't really add something to this energy transition. But as long as you add up all these small gestures, all these small actions, all these small initiatives, they can really make a difference. And especially when you organize yourself in your village or in the street that you live in, your neighbor has a bigger effect on you than your local mayor, for example. So by organizing yourself, and also by trying to convince your neighbors about the benefits of renewable energy, etc., I think you have a bigger impact than if you just sit and wait to see if the government does something for you. So yeah, start small and then definitely dream big, because we can achieve a lot if we just put our shoulders underneath it. So
Not it. Start small, dream big. And Ichsan, you have the take-home message for the young.
Yeah, I think in Indonesia we have a different approach for young people, because Indonesia now have some startups also for renewable energy, and I did also some mentoring for some startups. So the youngsters, they are more into renewable energy, especially for solar PV, make a marketplace for the solar PV, for example, and also for the biofuel, biogas, and so on. So they try already to enter the market, and they already think about what kind of technology that can be give support for this sector. So I'm very happy with that development, and then hopefully they can do a lot in the future. But I also do expect that it will be more startups, not only on the digital base, not only for marketplace, but also for the technology provider and so on.
Okay, so with that last comment from Ichsan, I would like to close this webinar. I would like to thank to all the speakers and also the organizer, the TYK Research and Action Consulting and Energy Academy Indonesia, for organizing this webinar, and also for all participants that already participated today in this webinar. And I would like to also bring your attentions to our next webinar, which will be held in 21st of August, highlighting the topic of interlinkage between climate change and sustainable development goals, which will be led by Anissa Trianti. So thank you very much.